Washington Journal continues.
And we are back with California Democrat Karen Bass, a member of the Foreign Affairs Judiciary Committees, also the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth.
Yes.
You're here to talk about child trafficking.
Right.
You have legislation.
Right.
Specifically, what is your legislation dealing with?
Well, first of all, there is a real problem in our child welfare system where a number of girls primarily get involved in sex trafficking. It's real tragedy. We'll go into it later. But essentially what the legislation says is that the child welfare system needs to change and needs to recognize that this is a serious problem. Well, one step toward changing is training the staff nationwide about this problem so that they learn to recognize it, and also that states put in place a response, resources, etc., to address this growing problem.
So we're talking about U.S. citizens.
We are talking about 12-year-old girls born in the U.S.
And what is happening? What does it mean to be trafficked?
Well, essentially what happens is that you will have, and the average age is around 12, a girl gets either taken off the streets or recruited by typically a guy who says he's her boyfriend and seduces them into the sex trafficking business. And a lot of places this is happening where you have gangs who are involved in drug trafficking, but they are also trafficking girls.
Where is this happening?
It's happening all over our country, but I will tell you that 3 of the major cities that this is happening in are in California: San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. But this is a national problem. This is happening in many of our major cities. And you might remember when the Super Bowl happened, there was a lot of attention to this. So a lot of times if there is a major sporting event, you will have girls who are sent from around the country to service or be exploited at those major sporting events.
Where are these girls, where these children coming from?
Well, they are coming from all over. Some of them are runaways, but a large percentage of girls are from the child welfare system. And this is one of the problems within our system. So let me just paint a picture for you, okay? You might have a 12-year-old girl that is upset at her foster parent, and she runs away. And she winds up inadvertently in the arms of a sex trafficker. You might have a girl that is in a group home situation, and you might have boys who are also in foster care that recruit her into being trafficked. So there's a lot of different ways this happens. My focus is specifically on the foster care system, but it is not only foster girls that are involved in trafficking.
How many kids are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about tens of thousands, but I will tell you that one of the things my legislation is doing is that we need to better document this problem within our country. So documentation is one of the critical things that are needed.
Right.
You know, I had a girl tell me, a 17-year-old, a young woman I should say, who was trafficked at the age of 10, from the age of 10 to 17. And she said that the nation's child welfare system helped prepare her to be trafficked. Because just think about it. She said that there was never anybody in my life that wasn't there who viewed me as a commodity because they were paid to take care of me. And that the first person that said they loved her was her pimp. How tragic is that?
So how much money are we talking about? How much money is in the system now to deal with this situation? How much money do you think is needed?
Well, the interesting thing is that this is not so much a financial issue. So I will tell you that there's not money in the system right now to deal with this because the system has not even begun to fully recognize that this is a problem. So that's why it's step one. Now, I'm happy to say that there's a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced that I'm confident will pass out of the House in the next couple of weeks, bipartisan legislation, with many members of the House of Representatives recognizing that we need a comprehensive solution to this problem. And so this is something that our nation is just beginning to become aware of. Because as you said a minute ago, these girls are from the United States. We are geared to view trafficking as an international problem, and we don't recognize that girls right here in our neighborhoods are getting involved in this. And I have to tell you something else that's incredibly tragic. The average lifespan of these girls, once they start into this, is 7 years. They don't live. They typically are either murdered or they die of HIV.
Let me show our viewers some graphics put together from the Juvenile Justice Information Exchange. This is from January of 2014. Take a look. 80% of the child trafficking victims are female. 50% are under the age of 18. The average age, 12 to 14. 300,000 kids a year trafficked. 41% of cases reported to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. 70% of the traffickers are male, and it's a $32 billion industry.
How tragic is that? This is something that our nation is just beginning to become aware of. Now, I have to tell you, too, that one of the things that fuels this is the internet. You have specific sites that traffickers know that they can advertise these girls. But we need to change the way we view this situation, because some people would call these girls prostitutes. But if you just think about it, it doesn't make sense to use that term for an underage girl, because if you are below the age of consent, how could you be considered a prostitute? So one of the things that happens in our nation in many places is these girls wind up being arrested and treated as though they are criminals, and it is not recognized by either law enforcement or social services that they are actually victims and shouldn't be arrested at all.
So would your legislation change that legally?
Well, that is actually something we can't change on a federal level. So a lot of it is about public awareness, you know? And in some instances, and I've had law enforcement officers tell me this, they don't want to arrest the girls, but they don't have any other way to get them away from the trafficker. So that speaks to another problem that we need to build up in our country. That will take some money. It might take redirecting current money, but one of the main problems is when you identify a girl that's trafficked, then what do? One of the reasons she keeps going back to her trafficker is because she has no place to go. And so there is a layer of infrastructure that needs to be built in our country. We need to have shelters. We need to have specific counselors. These girls need to be treated, in most instances, are suffering from PTSD. I mean, it's the same situation as a hostage, a prisoner, etc. A lot of them begin to adapt the mentality of their abusers. Some of them even turn into abusers and recruit other girls. They recruit their girlfriends. So this is a complex situation that really requires a lot of attention, which is why I'm glad that a number of members of Congress have come together to introduce legislation.
Republicans as well. You think this will get a vote?
Oh, I do. I do think it'll get a vote. I'm confident of that. And yes, this is a very bipartisan issue.
Let's take a look at your legislation. You
Sure.
want to identify and screen youth at risk of sex trafficking, document and report instances of sex trafficking, provide response training for CPS workers, require states to submit annual report on child trafficking to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data Systems, and require the HHS to report to Congress national trafficking stats and barriers to aiding these victims. Why is this a federal problem? Should not it be resolved on a state level?
Both. They're absolutely responses that need to happen on a state level. I'm happy in my state, you know, things have been happening. Several years ago, we passed state legislation when I was in the state legislature that said that the girls should not be arrested, that they should be treated as victims. So this requires a national response. So the legislation that you see many of us doing, I think there's probably about 14 members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, that have all joined together to do this. You see us essentially laying the foundation for what I believe over time will be a comprehensive response. So you see my legislation talking about documenting. Before you begin to address the problem, you really need to have a better handle on how widespread the problem is. What are there evidence-based practices for how we resolve the situation? So once you identify the girls, then what do? I will tell you that in my area, in the city of Compton, there's an innovative court that is called the Star Court, and that court is a court that specifically deals with underage girls who are trafficked. I went to meet with them one time, and before we went into the court proceedings, there was a room of people, social workers, educators, lawyers, defense, prosecution. Everybody sat around the table and discussed the cases before we went into proceedings, and it wasn't dealt with as though the girls were going to be prosecuted and incarcerated. It was all about how do we rescue these girls, how do we help them get out of the life. That's the mentality that we need to have. Right now, the mentality in our country is still behind in a lot of places. And again, we view these girls as criminals, not as victims.
We're talking with Representative Karen Bass about child trafficking in this country. Democrats 202-585-3880, Republicans 202-585-3881, and independents, all others, 202-585-3882. Want to get to your questions, your comments, and your questions for the Congresswoman here in just a minute, but let me show you this map of the United States and the states that are cracking down on child trafficking. The green states are the states with the toughest laws, and then you can see it go down from there. Tier 2 is yellow, Tier 3 is orange, Tier 4, one state, South Dakota, with the least amount of child trafficking laws on the books. We'll go to Jeff in Crofton, Nebraska, Republican caller, our first for the Congresswoman. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, hey, thanks for covering this. Funny that you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Glenn Beck had an individual or a group of people who were undercover, and he was asking for money to support this group who actually went from the States to Thailand. And they were very successful in saving quite a few kids, both boys and girls.
Right.
And so this is something that we definitely need to cover with more money, because and actually, what's going to happen with the kids on the border? How's all that going to work out? Who's going to check and make sure that they're not going to be abused?
Right. You know what? You're absolutely right. And I will tell you that one of the pieces of legislation that we are going to be dealing with that was put forward by Senator Landrieu and Congressman Chris Smith does deal with the international piece of this, and actually requires the State Department to set up a specific bureau. Right now, the State Department has an office, but we want to elevate it so that we recognize the significance of it. But I am, just as you said, very concerned about the children on the border, because number one, some of them were trafficked and brought here, but I'm also concerned that when we deport them back, that they're not put in the hands of traffickers. But I do just want to clarify that a lot of the legislation we're talking about and a lot of the trafficking we're talking about are kids that were born and raised in the United States, not the international piece of it. But I really appreciate you raising that.
We'll go to Eric next in Jonesboro, Georgia, Democratic caller. Hi, Eric.
Hi. I have a I guess, procedural question, but
Sure.
Before I get to that, you know, it amazes me that we're talking about child trafficking in a time where, you know, 60% of the workforce is labor participation. It's like an all-time low, and you know, Ms. Bass here is talking about child trafficking, and I agree that it's a problem, and I don't know how she plans to document it, but at a time when we're not talking about demand for business is down. Demand for business is down. That's because 1% of the country is getting 90% of the income growth. Now, that contributes to child trafficking, because, you know, you have pimps who are trying to make money instead of being able to get a job, because there's no demand.
Let's talk about that.
You know what? You are absolutely right. The demand is a very big issue, and I think that we need to address the demand. One of my concerns is that, you know, like the graph that you put up with the states that have trafficking laws, you know, the laws are focused on the traffickers, and rightfully so. But we also have to deal with the guys that exploit the children. And I think we need to change our mentality when we're thinking and talking about them as well. They shouldn't be called Johns. They should be called child molesters. If you have sex with an underage child, you are a child molester. So we need to change the way our society views this problem. And I do think that addressing the demand is one of the things that we need to do. You know, in some states, when you are talking about adult prostitution, they do things like put the pictures of the Johns up or something, you know. I think we need to figure out a way to address the demand.
Dave is next. East Orland, Maine, independent caller. Hi, Dave.
Well, the previous caller hit exactly on what I wanted to bring up, going after what was creating the demand.
Right.
I mean, you're talking 60,000 now for trafficking reasons. I just don't buy it. So,
What do you mean, Dave? 60,000 for what?
This latest scandal that's unfolding right now with the border,
Oh.
trying to attach this to child trafficking, is creating this influx of immigrants into the nation.
And you don't buy, I guess he doesn't buy it.
Okay, okay.
So-
well, you know, again, what our legislation is not about kids on the border, not about kids from other countries. It's about kids who were born and raised here. What I did say, though, previously is that I am concerned that some of the children who are coming up here by themselves are sent here by traffickers, and I'm worried about if and when they get deported that they're not put back in the hands of traffickers. But that is not what our legislation is addressing. We're addressing a homegrown problem. I'm primarily talking about girls, but boys are affected as well.
Let's talk about the southern border issue. USA
Sure.
Today has the headline, "Lawmakers Scoff at Cornyn Cuellar Border Funding Plan." Your colleague, Democratic Congressman Cuellar from Texas, is supporting legislation from his colleague, Republican Senator John Cornyn, that some in the Democratic Party, including the Majority Leader Harry Reid, have said it's too broad, they don't like it.
Right.
You agree, and why?
Yes, I do. I don't support the legislation now. I've not read the bill yet, but what I have heard about the bill, it changes the law that was passed that says that young people, minors who come from other countries seeking refugee status that are not from Mexico or Canada have to have a court proceeding and don't automatically get deported. I don't believe that in this crisis we should change that law. That law was put there. It was put during Republican administrations, bipartisan support, and I don't think it's time to fundamentally change the law. We do need to address the crisis, and in the president's plan, he has called for money so that we can increase the time that it takes, or I'm sorry, decrease the time that it takes to put the child through a proceeding. The child should also have legal representation, which right now doesn't happen. So can you imagine a 7 or an 8-year-old kid sitting in a courtroom with nobody there to help them? I think at the end of the day, we need to stay focused that these are children.
Well, the legislation, according to USA Today,
Yes.
would streamline how the U.S. processes these minors, expediting court proceedings to either allow them to apply for asylum or be returned home. Congressman Cuellar was on our show recently, and he said this needs to happen, that we already have this type of process for Mexico and Canada. We should get the same arrangement with these Central American countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and quickly expedite these children.
I do think that the process should be expedited. I don't agree with the way he is talking about expediting it. What I think needs to happen is we need to increase the number of judges, we need to increase the number of lawyers so that the process can be expedited without fundamentally changing the law. I do think that we need to think about what is going on in these Central American countries and why people are fleeing. And it's kind of ironic because I'm from Los Angeles, and the gang problem that exists in El Salvador started in Los Angeles. And what happened is that we deported tens of thousands of gang members who went down to El Salvador and continued the criminal behavior that they had in the Los Angeles area. So I think that in addition to expediting the process by increasing resources, the other thing we need to do is assist the Central American countries deal with some of the problems that they're facing.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid told reporters yesterday the border is secure. You're from
Right.
California. Do
Right.
you agree?
Well, you know, if you look at how we have spent money or resources that have been increased, in the last 7 or 8 years, we've increased money to the border to strengthen the border by 350%. This is not an issue of the border not being secure. Remember, you have these children coming to the border, looking for the Border Patrol and turning themselves in. They're not trying to flee, so it's not a question of the border not being secure.
Yeah, and we're showing our viewers, this is a picture in the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal. Immigrants from El Salvador and Honduras, after being stopped for illegal border crossing, a number of children standing there. Let me show you the Arizona Republic front page as well, courtesy of the museum. They have this picture with the caption that after crossing the border at the southern tip of Texas, women, children, and unaccompanied minors from Central America promptly give themselves up. The headline being, "Waiting to Surrender," on the front page of the Arizona Republic.
You know, they've interviewed these kids, and they've said that they were happy when they saw the Border Patrol. So I think it's a false issue to say that the border needs to be, you know, more secure. But then, frankly, let's just go with that for a minute. If we want the border to be more secure, then why don't we pass the bill from the Senate? Because that even added resources to the border.
Let's go to Denise in Camden, New Jersey, Democratic caller. Hi, Denise.
Hi.
Good morning. Go ahead. You're on the air.
I was just calling because the girls that you drew text, and some of them are, you know, with child and pregnant from these Johns or pedophiles, what you want to call them, and then half of them are on drugs or whatever,
Right.
being out there. Why don't they take and put them in some kind of facility until they have their child, so
Right.
that child comes in here drug-free? Because you see so many kids being born in this country from out there on the streets, and they have drugs in their system, you know, and then that's another problem that you got to take care of, because that child is coming here, you know, with a drug problem.
All right.
You know,
Congresswoman?
I agree with you. We have a wonderful program in the Los Angeles area called Shields for Families, which does exactly what you said. And in fact, they've been able to keep a number of children out of the child welfare system by bringing the mother, when she was pregnant, into their facility, providing drug treatment services, counseling services, making sure that baby is born drug-free, but then also helping the mother address her addiction. So that's something else that we didn't talk about the trafficking issue. One of the things that happens to the girls right away is that the pimps get them strung out on some type of drug. And if you can only imagine, they need to medicate themselves with illegal drugs just to survive what the pimps put them through, turning 10, 20 tricks in a night.
We'll go to Summerdale, Alabama, on our line for Democrats. Brandy.
Yes, ma'am.
Morning.
Good morning to you also.
We're listening, Brandy.
Yes, I would like to congratulate President Barack Obama. My grandfather is always doing right and everything else, and he makes me very proud, and I have no idea what else to say.
Okay, we'll move on. Paul.
Thank you.
And Pennsylvania, independent caller. Hi, Paul.
Good morning, Ms. Greta.
Morning.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
You bet, Paul. Go ahead. What's your question or comment for Congresswoman Bass?
I just have one question for Ms. Bass.
Yes.
She has already touched on a lot of what my question is, but I would like your opinion on the pros and cons of this subject. And that's my only question.
The pros and cons of the subject, well, there are no pros. There are only cons. We have girls beginning at the age of 12 who are trafficked, sex trafficked. And to me, the legislation, the comprehensive legislation that we're looking at is to address the problem. Now, I can see a pro. The pro is that this legislation is going to pass, and it's going to pass out of the House, I believe, in a week, and it's bipartisan legislation. So that's the pro.
And in the Senate?
And in the Senate, that's another story. I do believe that it'll be supported in the Senate.
Okay.
I do. I mean, this is just not a very controversial topic, and I'm happy to say that it's not.
We'll go to Katrina next in Castro Valley, California, an independent caller there. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call, and I'm very happy to see that Representative Bass is on. I'm happy to have her as a California representative, and it's just a real pleasure to speak with you this morning.
Great.
I think some of this child trafficking thing is fueled by the pornography towards pedophilia
Right.
in men. And I'm not a man hater, so brothers, don't get mad at me because most of you guys are cool. But listen, what a crime against a minor under 18. That is. Can't you wait until they're 18? You could be 75 and still get yourself a sharp 18-year-old.
Oh.
They're an adult, right? But that is a philosophical problem. The society, and you look at the priests and everything, and that is a problem.
Okay, Katrina. And
Well, she is right. Child pornography, child sex tourism, all of this is interconnected, and it's happening right in our own communities, and we need to recognize this.
And on Twitter, here's a tweet from one of our viewers. How do we punish the people who traffic these kids? Is it severe enough? Are they easy to convict?
Well, that's a good question. When you showed that map of the country, there are very severe laws in many states. So, for example, in California, we passed a ballot initiative. And so what happens is a pimp who's involved in trafficking, if the girls are underage, then they serve a lot more time. And there are task forces that are happening. The FBI, for example, leads a task force called Innocence Lost, which brings together all different departments in law enforcement to address this problem. And there have been major arrests that have taken place. I referenced a while ago the Super Bowl. There's been a couple of major arrests in California. So I think that this issue is getting more and more publicity. But again, just like we can tell from our callers, it's going to take a mind shift for understand that this is not an international problem. This is a problem right here in our own backyard.
We'll hear from Jim next in Chicago. Independent caller. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning. Congresswoman, back in 1995, there was a book that came out. It was called The Franklin Chronicles, and it talks about the kids that were living in Boydtown and I think Omaha, Nebraska. And this book talks about a lot of well-known people involved in picking up kids for their own pleasure. And I was wondering if you have read this book. If not, you should read it. And this is something that was pointed out in 1995, and it seems like no one really wanted to do anything about it, including the current, I should say the FBI, who investigated Boydtown. And my other question is this: since there are a lot of people, not just pimps, who are involved in this, such as politicians or well-known people, what do you think can be done about this situation?
Well, you know, I do think that we have these moments in history, whereas 1995 might have been too early. Now things are beginning to change. And like I mentioned earlier, there's still too many areas around the country where these girls are referred to as prostitutes and they're arrested. That's the type of mentality that needs to change. But sometimes it takes a while for our society to change. But I think that that change is beginning to happen now. And I think that this legislation, the fact that there are a number of bills, the fact that they're all bipartisan, is an example of our society beginning to change.
How big of a problem is this globally?
Oh, it's a huge problem globally. It really is. And, you know, the United States does a report, a trafficking in persons report, that really looks at the entire world. And we grade countries based on tiers as to how they are really trying to address the problem or not. And so it is absolutely an international problem. And really, up until a couple of years ago, we didn't realize it was a domestic problem at all.
Long Beach, California. Tracy is calling from there, an independent caller. Good morning, Tracy.
Yeah, good morning. Hi, I'm Congressman Bass. I reside here in L.A. County, and I've had the pleasure of listening to you on the front page of the local radio station here in Los Angeles.
Great.
Yeah, I just want to touch base with you. You know, it's a pleasure always to see you.
Thank you.
But again, here being in SoCal and like most of the Southwest, you know, there's an issue as it relates to crime and trafficking that emanates simply due to the lax enforcement of borders, particularly here on the Southwest. And it seems that, you know, a lot of the times politicians, both Democratic and Republicans, primarily Democrats, you're misfocused on getting at the root causes of the issue. That's not to say that wouldn't be an occurrence here. There'll always be people that are opportunistic and willing to take advantage of of women.
Right,
But,
right.
So Congressman, I'm dealing with the symptoms, not the problem. He says it's a border problem.
Right, and again, what we're talking about are people who are born children, who are born and raised in the United States. And this is a problem that's happening in Long Beach, absolutely, and I'm sure you know the part of Long Beach where this is happening. It's happening all throughout Los Angeles County, and it's something that we need to address. But I just will emphasize, these are girls that were born and raised in the United States. The issue on the border, I believe, is a different issue, but we have to figure out how to deal with the problem that's happening in our own backyard.
On the border issue, the governor of Texas, Rick Perry, Republican, echoes what that caller just said in his opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal this morning, what Obama missed on the border. And he writes that President Obama last week proposed $3.7 billion in spending to deal with the continuing crisis, but only a sort of that money would go to the actual core of this problem, the lack of sufficient resources to secure the border. The majority of the billions he proposes to spend, including on housing and transporting the minors around the country, is treating the symptoms of the problem instead of addressing its root cause.
Well, I think if we want to talk about the root causes, then we have to look at why people are so desperate to leave their countries to come here. That's the root cause. If we just want to talk about border security, it's been increased 350% over the last few years. There is a bill sitting in the Senate that could be passed in the House in a moment's notice that would increase border security resources even further. And so I think that it's a little bit off base to talk about what the president has proposed today when we do have legislation. And I think what the president told the governor is he would be very helpful if he would talk to the Republicans from Texas and ask them to go ahead and vote for immigration reform. He could also call Speaker Boehner and say, Speaker Boehner, can't you just put the Senate bill on the House? We believe there's enough votes there. Some of your members even want to vote for immigration reform, but you won't allow the bill to come up for a vote. So if you're really concerned about border security, we have a solution. Speaker Boehner needs to step up.
The governor also wants National Guard, 1,000 National Guard put on the border. He wants the FAA to approve drones along the border.
I think what the governor wants is to run for president again, okay? Because if we have a situation where the kids are looking for the border patrol so they can turn themselves in, what good does it do to have drones in the National Guard? He's trying to rectify mistakes he made during his first presidential campaign when he was sympathetic toward immigrants, and he got hit for that. So now he's shifting to the right and all of a sudden wanting to look tough. So this is about setting the stage for a 2016 presidential run from Governor Perry.
We'll go to Jerry, Harmony, North Carolina, independent caller. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Ms. Bass, I'd like to address this immigration thing a little bit. You talk about sex trafficking.
Yes.
I wonder just how many of these young girls and boys that's going to be, they're shipping them all over our country. How many of these kids are going to end up on the street working for some pimp? And I think our government has just got involved in sex trafficking.
Well, you know, we had a meeting yesterday with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and I actually asked her whether or not the kids coming across the border were going to end up in the child welfare system. And what she told me is that the ones that are allowed to stay temporarily until they have a hearing would be placed with relatives, because the overwhelming majority of them are coming here in search of relatives. And so they are able to call their family members and they would be with their family members. Now, do some children fall through the cracks? I have no doubt about that. But, you know, we have a very serious problem in our country with child sex trafficking, but the majority of the children that are trafficked are born and raised in the United States. They're not coming across anyone's border.
USA Today reports that the full Senate will get a briefing from the administration tonight on the situation on the southern border. We'll go to Joe next, Bronx, New York, Democratic caller. Hi.
Good morning, Greta. How are you?
Morning.
Good morning, Ms. Barnes. My name is Joe. I'm from the Bronx, New York. Usually when I call, I say I'm Joe the counselor, not Joe the plumber, because this is what Greta knows. Now, Ms. Barnes, what I want to say this morning, I've been watching these things that happening there since 3 weeks ago, whatever it is. And I'm so amazed to see how, hey, the people that call themselves the Christian.
Yeah.
And when I look at the definition of a Christian is nothing but a person who thinks Christ-like. That's all a Christian is. And the same people that say, send them back. Don't let them stay in our country. Send them back. And then when you look at all these third world countries that this country, America, goes, who don't have nothing but slingshots and rocks to defend themselves. When you had Mr. Bush send this war to Iraq, and the people on the main street are telling me over 5 million people went to refugees, right, because of that war between Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, these little third world countries took these refugees. Now, when you said send them back, these people, so you say they're not Christian? Say they are the Christian. They didn't say send them back.
Right.
Okay, got your point, Joe.
Well, and you know what? I think it's so sad, frankly, the images of people being really hostile over the buses, you know, and there's children on those buses, children who've been totally traumatized by the journey that they've had to take. And they come over here in search of their relatives, and they're greeted by 200-300 adults who look very hateful and hostile. And frankly, it resurrects images to me of in the 70s and 80s around busing, when kids were just greeted in such a hostile manner. And I can only imagine what those children who are sitting on the buses are thinking. I really think that this is a humanitarian crisis. We need to put away our feelings and thoughts around immigration right now. If we do want to focus on that, then we need to focus on passing comprehensive immigration reform. If we want to increase resources to the border, there's a bill to do that that could be voted on today. So I think we really need to focus. And to me, to have all of this hatred and hostility toward children who've made this journey, I think is very sad.
We'll go to Gabby in Lynn, Massachusetts. Democratic caller, last for Congresswoman Karen Bass. Go ahead.
Hi, Congresswoman. My name is Kathy, Lady K.
Hi, Lady K.
Go ahead.
Hi, Congresswoman. I am so happy you are addressing this issue. I'm very thankful for CSPAN. I watch CSPAN all the time. This issue is not only a child issue, it's a woman, is hatred against women problem. It's across the world. It's not only about America. I lived in Los Angeles for 17 and a half years. And what I found out, I worked with the government of the state of California for 7 years. The federal government funds training for welfare women. But these women are being blocked from training by the state, the local government that are supposed to be sending them to this treatment because they are training. They are being labeled unable to be trained because they have less than 0.25 mental reasoning.
So Gabby's point about this sort of hatred toward women, a cultural, societal issue.
Well, I mean, you know, I think that when we are looking at child sex trafficking, I think what happens to these children is that they grow up with such terrible self-esteem and feelings of self-worth, feeling hated. And it's one of the things that keeps them with the trafficker. And I think that when we talk about root causes with the girls, we really do have to look at that, because the overwhelming majority of the girls who wind up trafficked had been sexually abused earlier in their life.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, thank you for talking to our viewers.